power. For centuries, it was thought to be the one thing that shielded men from pain. Kings sat on gilded thrones, wrapped in silk, guarded by armies, their word equal to law. But behind those walls of gold and divine right, the crown could not protect them from the thing they feared most, the slow unraveling of their own minds. Some were tortured by their enemies, others by their own courts, and some by the weight of their own power. In royal chambers across history, silence sometimes screamed louder than war. Doors locked from the outside, whispers of betrayal echoing down endless corridors. And kings who once commanded nations now left staring into nothing, broken, trembling, and alone. Take King Charles VI of France, known later as Charles the Mad. At first, he was a brilliant, youthful ruler, adored by his people, respected by nobles. But one day in 1392, during a military march through the forest of Le Mans, something snapped. Without warning, Charles turned on his own men, drawing his sword and striking them down in blind fury. When restrained, he collapsed, shaking, whispering that demons had taken his soul. From that day forward, his madness grew. He believed he was made of glass, that a touch, a hug, or even a sudden movement would shatter him into pieces. Servants were forbidden to approach. He sat motionless for hours, terrified that his body would break apart. At times, his physicians tied him in padded chambers, not out of care, but out of fear. Fear of what he might do to himself. Chroniclers later describe how courtiers mocked his fragility behind closed doors, but others whispered that his mind had been broken not by disease, but by something darker. Some claimed the royal physicians had tested treatments, alchemical purges, cold immersions, the application of burning irons to the skull, methods meant to rebalance the humors. Each experiment left him weaker, less human. It was not healing, it was torture, dressed in the language of science. Across the sea, in England, Henry VI suffered a quieter torment. His madness was not violent, but hollow. He would sit for days, unblinking, unable to speak or recognize his own son. Courtiers took advantage of his stillness, manipulating the kingdom while his mind drifted into fog. His doctors forced strange concoctions down his throat, brews of lead and herbs, which only worsened his condition. And in the cruelest of ironies, when he recovered his senses, he was told of the civil war that had erupted in his name, his friends dead, his family divided. The truth itself became his final torture. But not all madness came from the inside. Some kings were deliberately broken. In the Ottoman Empire, the practice of fratricide was law. When a new sultan took power, his brothers were strangled with silk cords, a bloodless mercy. They called it. But later, when reformers sought to stop the killings, princes were instead locked away for life in the caves. The cage. Imagine it. A gilded prison inside the Topkapi Palace, where royal heirs lived in permanent isolation. No sunlight, no visitors, no human touch. Years passed in silence. Some entered as boys and left as hollow men. When one of them finally ascended the throne, his first words were not of triumph, but of fear. Sultan Mustafa would pace his chambers muttering to invisible attendants, sometimes screaming at empty walls. He believed shadows were plotting against him. Perhaps they were. Centuries later, the same palace would record whispers of another broken heir, Sultan Ibrahim. Known as Ibrahim the Mad, after years confined in the caves, he emerged trembling, terrified of mirrors and music. His paranoia grew into cruelty. He ordered servants executed for imagined offenses, demanded that the palace floors be covered in silk, because he could no longer bear the feel of stone. Yet behind the madness lay years of confinement, deprivation, and psychological decay. The empire had built its own monsters, not out of evil, but out of fear of it, even in Russia. Power offered no safety. Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, began his reign as a reformer, intelligent and visionary. But after his wife's mysterious death, he descended into uncontrollable rage. Convinced everyone was plotting against him, he created the Oprichnina, a secret police devoted to torture, purification, and execution. But those he tortured most were not his enemies. They were reflections of his paranoia. Nobles, priests, even his own blood. Once, in a fit of fury, he struck his son across the head with his staff. The blow killed him. When Ivan realized what he'd done, he collapsed, holding the body, wailing. That moment, a king weeping over the corpse of his heir, became the image of a monarch finally crushed. Beneath his own cruelty, his was a madness forged by power, the kind that doesn't strike suddenly, but grows slowly, like rust spreading through iron. Europe was not alone. In China, the Ming and Qing dynasties both recorded cases of imperial torment. Some emperors feared assassination so deeply they isolated themselves in labyrinthine palaces. They trusted no one, not even their wives or guards. Food was tested by slaves, letters burned unread. The emperor, Jiajing, obsessed with alchemy, forced concubines to collect rare ingredients for his immortality elixirs. When they refused, he ordered them beaten, until one night, they tried to strangle him in his sleep. Their failure led to executions that lasted weeks, each woman tortured until death. But Jiajing did not escape the punishment of his own creation. The mercury and gold powders he consumed, meant to grant eternal life, instead poisoned him slowly, driving him into insanity. The same ritual that was supposed to make him divine turned his body into decay, and his mind into chaos. From the west to the east, from palaces to prisons, the story was the same. Kings surrounded by walls of power, yet prisoners of their own minds. Torture didn't always come from enemies or inquisitors. Sometimes it was built into the crown itself: isolation, suspicion, and the unbearable weight of fear. History often paints madness as weakness, but these stories reveal something different. Power without restraint becomes its own punishment. The higher the throne, the deeper the fall into the abyss. Kings commanded armies and shaped empires, but in the end, they could not command their own minds. Their crowns had become cages, each jewel, each title, each oath to God or nation, a chain binding them to madness. By the time their minds began to fracture, there was no one left who dared tell them the truth. Servants smiled with fear behind their eyes. Advisors whispered half-truths in candlelit halls, and the kings themselves, trapped between power and paranoia, began to see ghosts in every shadow. Charles VI of France, the Glass King, spent his last years not as a ruler, but as a ghost inside his own palace. He would scream at reflections, believing another man was staring back from behind the mirror. A man who wanted to steal his soul. His courtiers were ordered never to speak his name. When he died, there was no grand ceremony, no final speech, only silence. The king who once believed he was made of glass left behind a kingdom shattered for real. A France divided, and a legacy that still trembled through the centuries in England. Henry VI's story ended beneath the Tower of London after years of mental collapse. He was captured during the Wars of the Roses, pale, silent, and broken. They said he prayed constantly, muttering to himself, unaware of the guards watching. One night, his prayers stopped. When dawn came, his body was found cold, a faint bruise around his neck. The records said natural causes, but history knows better, even in death. The crown had no mercy. Far away in the Ottoman Empire, the caliphs continued its quiet cruelty. Sultan Mustafa I, the man once raised in total silence, began to wander the palace muttering, "Have they killed my brothers yet?" Servants followed him in terror, unsure whether to comfort or flee. He would stop suddenly, staring at empty air, whispering names no one else could hear. Eventually, the council removed him, not with blood, but with confinement. He was returned to the caves, the same place that had driven him insane. And there he stayed until death, his mind lost, his title stripped. Then came Sultan Ibrahim, whose madness turned the empire itself into his stage. Years of isolation had rotted his reason. He once filled his palace pool with perfume and swam in it naked, claiming it would purify his soul. Another time, he ordered an entire harem drowned because he believed one woman had cursed him. His paranoia spiraled until even his guards whispered in fear. Finally, the council, unable to bear the chaos any longer, stormed his chambers and strangled him with a silk cord, the same method once reserved for his royal brothers. The empire had birthed a mad king, and then executed him to restore its sanity in Russia. Ivan the Terrible's madness only deepened with time. His final days were marked by hallucinations. He claimed to see his dead son standing in corners, bleeding. Accusing him, Ivan began to carry relics, bones, and charms, begging priests to exorcise the blood from his soul. Witnesses say that on the night of his death, he sat before a chessboard, muttering to himself, making moves for both sides. Halfway through the game, he fell forward, motionless. The board remained between the black and white squares, the final symbol of a life divided between brilliance and brutality. But the pattern didn't die with him. In China, Emperor Jiajing's obsession with immortality destroyed not only his mind, but his empire's peace. The alchemical fumes he inhaled daily poisoned his lungs, blackened his teeth, and warped his thoughts. Toward the end, he ordered that no one speak in his presence. The palace grew silent, a living tomb for a living god. When he finally died, attendants found his body surrounded by scrolls describing eternal life. His tongue stained gold from mercury. His pursuit of eternity had given him nothing but agony. Even in later centuries, the curse continued. King Ludwig II of Bavaria, known as the Mad King, isolated himself in a fantasy world of castles and music, building dreamlike fortresses as his kingdom crumbled around him. His ministers declared him insane and took his crown. Days later, he was found dead in a lake. No witnesses, no explanation. A king consumed by his own imagination, drowned by the world he tried to escape. And so, century after century, the pattern repeats, power feeding fear, fear breeding madness, and madness turning to cruelty. For kings, there was no such thing as safety. They could command the deaths of thousands, yet not the silence inside their own minds. Historians often call these cases psychological decline, but behind those careful words hides something darker. Many of these rulers were broken through isolation, confinement, or manipulation. Royal doctors, priests, and counselors all claimed to cure. But what they really did was experiment, leeching, bleeding, starvation, cold water immersions, even electric shocks in later eras, all under the guise of royal medicine. It wasn't treatment. It was torment with permission. And maybe that's the true horror. The kings who tortured others became victims of torture themselves, not through rebellion or justice, but through the machinery of fear they helped create. In the end, power didn't protect them. It devoured them. Their palaces became prisons. Their crowns became weights. Their thrones, the very symbols of their might, became seats of endless isolation. Every ruler thought they were unbreakable. Every one of them learned the same truth. No man, no matter how powerful, can escape the tortures of the mind. Because when kings go insane, the whole kingdom bleeds. If stories like this fascinate you, if you want to uncover more forgotten histories of pain, fear, and power, make sure to follow Torture's Room. Because what history buried in silence, we bring back to light.